Right. Hello, everyone. I am Alex Lim, your host, and welcome to AuthorStory, the home of authors and stories that matter. This episode's featured guest is Nick Nicholas, author of Pericles and Me, a novel of international intrigue. So, Nick, welcome to AuthorStory. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Great. Okay, so, well, first off, your background. I'd like to point out to our listeners that the fuller version of your name is Nicholas C. Nicholas, PhD. So there's more to you than just quote unquote Nick Nicholas.
That's
Oh,
right. Well, I was born in the city of Pittsburgh of Greek immigrants,
okay.
and that was crucial to my upbringing and my education
Mm-hmm.
because Greek immigrants, although mostly people with very little education, valued education,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was foregone conclusion that I would educate myself.
All right.
I'm a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University with a BS in physics,
Mm-hmm.
a master's degree in physics from Drexel University,
Mm-hmm.
and a PhD in physics and mathematics from Catholic University.
Yeah.
The bulk of my career has been spent working on projects for the Department of Defense,
Mm-hmm.
and that included a lot of travel
Mm-hmm.
to the Middle East, to the former Soviet Union, and all over Europe.
Mm-hmm.
As it says in my bio on the book, I've always followed the interesting work,
Mm-hmm.
and if I had it to do over again, I would do very little different except more of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a very satisfying career.
All right.
I've seen a lot of the world.
All right.
Some of it I didn't like, and some of it I did like.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the book Pericles and Me is drawn from all that experience in these countries.
Mm-hmm.
So
All
that
right.
deeply colored the book.
All right. Right.
Uh,
Okay, so I got that you're doing a lot of before we get into the book, just like to know that you did a lot of work in you travel a lot, and
yes.
this work that you did, I mean, you could have, I imagine you could have done your work, like just being in a lab or being just one place. So what was it that made you go around to these different places? Was it part of the work that you did, or did you really have a drive to like go there?
I had a drive to go there.
Okay.
Uh, for example, I became curious about the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and so I earned my living for about 5 years as a freelance consultant,
Mm-hmm.
and an opportunity came up to travel to Saudi Arabia
Mm-hmm.
for the National Science Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and I took that opportunity, and I got along very well with the Saudis. I kept my opinions to myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
After all, it's their country, not mine.
Right, right.
And as a result, the Saudis requested that the National Science Foundation hire me and name me senior program manager for the Middle East. And that happened, and I got to travel there more. Uh, I served on the first research grants board ever convened on the Arabian Peninsula.
Mm-hmm.
I got to know some high officials quite well,
Mm-hmm.
and I was generally very well treated because I was there as a guest in their country.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but what I saw there was perplexing, as
Mm-hmm.
is Middle Eastern culture from a Westerner's vantage point.
Right,
On the one hand, there were lots of things that took place that we disapprove of,
right.
but in addition, there was that immense hospitality that Middle Eastern culture bestows upon its visitors.
Mm-hmm.
So, like most places, it was a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
I drew upon those characters in my book, and actually had some very interesting times there.
Right.
For example, there was one to show you how different our thinking can be.
Right.
There was one point where we had to delay what we were doing. I was there to advise them on how to establish a national laboratory,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I said, unfortunately, that's going to delay things for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the head of their scientific establishment, a wonderful man, said to me, we've been on this peninsula for about 25 years, 2,500 years.
Mm-hmm.
We discovered technology about 20 years ago. Another 6 months won't make a lot of difference.
Okay.
So that was the mindset. and you had to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we Westerners are very impatient, I'm afraid, in their eyes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the Middle East.
Right.
As far as Ukraine goes,
Mm-hmm.
I had a colleague come to me and when the Soviet Union broke up, and he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Look, everybody's going to Russia. Ukraine is being neglected. Let's you and I go to work there to help them eliminate their nukes."
Right. Right.
So we telephoned the ranking Ukrainian uh, diplomat in the United States, who was their permanent representative to the UN.
Mm-hmm.
We pleaded for a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
They reluctantly granted us 30 minutes. We got on the train in Washington, went to New York, went there, and my partner got along famously with this guy. We ended up staying 3 hours, having lunch, drinking an entire bottle of brandy,
Right.
and subsequently we were invited to Ukraine to offer our advice on how to take down the nukes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from that experience that much of my book is drawn.
Right.
As
Right.
for Germany, there's much about Germany in my book.
Mm-hmm.
It's particularly Heidelberg, where I was based for a while,
Mm-hmm.
working on the Pershing missile system,
Mm-hmm.
trying to find ways to help protect the Pershings when they were deployed in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
The Pershings were there to counter the huge Soviet advantage in men and tanks. These were nuclear-tipped intermediate range missiles.
Mm-hmm.
That was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually approached by a spy there,
Mm-hmm.
but that's another story.
Right. Definitely.
So,
Probably for another book, huh?
and then I've had long experience working with the Navy's ballistic missile fleet. I rode submarines a couple of times. I done work in the laboratory. I did work on thin film physics. And early in my career, I was the engineering officer in the first simulated Apollo flight. I was fitted with a pressure suit, went through all the astronaut training, spent 8 days in the Apollo capsule doing everything it takes to fly to the moon. And from that, we learned a lot about work cycles and what we could expect of people, fatigue,
Right.
and so on. So that was an interesting experience too.
Yeah. And I
So
mean, yeah.
you can see why I've enjoyed my career immensely.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when I'm sure myself personally, when I think of ballistic missile, I think of, okay, there's this thing over here. But, hearing it from someone who's actually, been there, seen these things, probably,
Yeah.
touched and worked on some of the systems of these things, it brings a whole new dimension to that aspect.
Yeah, I was an observer at a meeting where there was a discussion as to what a nuclear exchange would cost,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hard to take talks arguing whether 10 million casualties was acceptable, but 15 was not. And when you try to envision that in terms of people,
Right.
I always thought of stadiums full of people. How many stadiums full of people would that be? And it's quite alarming to think of it in those terms.
Right.
But in Ukraine, I got to know a great number of high-ranking officers, and I had a 3-star general tell me that the Soviet Union was terrified of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him if they thought we would ever make a first strike,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, well, the reason they were so frightened is because if they had our power, they would have launched a first strike,
Mm-hmm.
because the Soviets, and he was not a Soviet supporter. He did not support
Mm-hmm.
the Soviet Union per se.
Right.
He was an officer.
Mm-hmm.
He said they didn't care how many people died as long as they won,
Mm-hmm.
and that's chilling to hear.
Right.
But the mutually assured destruction policy held until President Reagan
Mm-hmm.
realized that it was dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
that eventually there would be an exchange, and that's when he launched his drive to outspend the Soviets, and it worked because their system was so creaky because of their crazy economics.
Mm-hmm.
Soviet Union didn't fall all in one day. I mean, it took years, but it got shakier and shakier, and finally their economics were just untenable,
Mm-hmm.
and they came apart, and their internal politics arose, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I don't want to give a history of that, but the Soviet Union was formally declared uh, disbanded on December 31st, 1991.
Mm.
My first trip to Ukraine was right at the end of that January 92, beginning or February 92.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, it was still very Soviet, and that was fascinating to see.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I had a guy following me, and I used to play tricks on him. I'd go around the corner and wait. He'd come running around the corner to catch up with me, and then I'd say good day to him in Russian, and he would run over to this public phones that everyone knew didn't work and pretend he was making a call.
Right.
So finally I said to him, look, I'm not doing anything that you can't see. Let's be civilized about this. Why don't you walk with me? And he said, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we started chatting. I bought him lunch, and pretty soon he became my advisor.
Okay.
So it's, human beings are the same everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they generally respond to warmth unless they're really truly cold-blooded people. And this guy was not. He was just trying to earn a living.
Right. Right. Okay. So all right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting life and very interesting stories. So.
Well, friends have been urging me for years to write a book, and Pericles and me was the output. Although it's a fiction, there's a lot of truth in it,
Mm-hmm.
true events, and in fact, in the preface, I challenge the reader to separate the true events from the fanciful ones. And I didn't give this warning, but it's true. Some of the most outrageous things were actually true.
Mm-hmm.
Like the time I was locked in an insane asylum because they didn't have a hotel to put us up in. So, and that was an interesting idea too. It's the one and only time my partner really lost his temper. He didn't like it in there. And they released guard dogs on the grounds, and one of them was under his window howling at the moon.
Right.
And I went and I said to him in my best Dracula voice, the children of the night, what music they make. And he actually dropped an F-bomb on me, which was very unlike him. That's the only time I ever heard him use foul language.
All right. Cool. All right. So let me just get a little bit of an insight in your process. I mean, as an academic and as a researcher, I'm sure you've written a lot of papers on various subjects, and I imagine that writing papers is different from writing a novel. So what made you decide to? You mentioned that you wanted to write this. So what made you decide to finally write the novel?
Well, I don't know. I can't choose a moment of enlightenment or anything such thing.
Right.
But some of the things I saw and experienced bothered me very much, especially some of the things that within our own government. And I would witness events overseas, and I'd come home and I'd read the newspaper accounts of them, and I'm wondering, what did they see? Because they certainly didn't see what I saw. And at first I thought, well, maybe they have more insight than I do, but it happened so often that it was disturbing. And so that's sort of stuck in me and bothered me. And a couple of years ago, I'm retired now, and I have time, and I sat down and I just started writing. And the device of Pericles occurred to me right away as a means of discussion and explanation and comparisons with ancient history. Because the ancient Greeks, for example, did all the things that we did in their foreign policies. I mean, for example, in the book, Pericles and the main character's name, who is Alex, have a talk about comparing Athenian and American policies. The Athenians once sent a powerful fleet to visit their sources of grain on the Black Sea coast because they were becoming restive. And it was a friendship visit, but it settled everything down. Well, Teddy Roosevelt did the same thing with our Great White Fleet. He sent it to the Pacific, visited Manila, by the way, and gave a signal out that the United States was prepared to protect its interests, avoided a war, achieved its objective peacefully. And so there's a one-to-one comparison example of what they were like. And I just hope we can avoid the traps that the Athenians fell into
Mm-hmm.
when they tried to impose democracy on all of Greece. And
Mm-hmm.
the Greek city-states weren't having it. They wanted to
Mm-hmm.
go their own way. And the result was the Peloponnesian War, which ultimately destroyed Athens. So
Right.
I do hope our country doesn't do the same thing. So I sat down, no plan, no plot, and just started writing. And so help me, it just poured out of me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it took 3 months to write 400 pages. That's fast.
Wow.
And I did some editing, got hold of a publisher, and out it went. And the people who have reviewed it seem to like it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
great literature. It's a story,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a story that people seem to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it has several facets to it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's a there's a romantic interest,
Mm-hmm.
which I invented, by the way, in case divorce lawyers are listening.
Mm-hmm.
And the it, the character of Dave was actually the guy who was my partner in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
There were some 34 characters, I think, in
Wow.
it. And all are people I knew,
Mm-hmm.
except for two or three that I invented.
Mm-hmm.
The Saudis are modeled after people I knew. The
Mm-hmm.
Ukrainians are modeled after people I knew.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans, uh, the U.S. government officials, they're all modeled after people I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's why I felt very easy for me to write.
Mm. Right.
And I've started a couple of other books, but I don't seem to have the fluidity on those that I had on Pericles. Maybe it'll come
Mm-hmm.
when I get more into them.
Mm. Right. Okay. And I mean this. I can imagine. I mean, this draws heavily on what you saw and what you experienced. Um,
Yes.
this really comes out. It really made the process easy for you.
Yes. Yes. If you're writing about something you know, it's pretty easy. Now,
Right.
as you said, I've been writing all my life, papers and scientific papers, proposals, position papers, and so on. So writing is not new to me,
Right.
but it's a different kind of writing. This was much more relaxed writing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't have to worry about every little nuance, but I guess really good authors do, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my literature, my composition professor at Carnegie Tech. He
Mm-hmm.
said, "None of you's going to be a Scott Fitzgerald or a Shakespeare, but by God, you're going to learn how to write a simple declarative sentence." And that
Right.
has stood in good stead, especially when I had to negotiate through a translator.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking through a translator, you can't use convoluted sentences or
Mm-hmm.
slang or get too subtle because so much is lost in translation.
Right.
Even if you're translating from English, say, into French or German, there's a little bit lost there. But when you're translating into into Arabic, there's a lot lost because the
Mm-hmm.
nuances are very different.
Mm-hmm.
I convey a story about the time I got into a little trouble speaking Arabic. I tried to learn a little Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a coffee shop and my driver didn't want any coffee, so I tried to say 1 cup of coffee, please.
Mm-hmm.
I said it perfectly, even using the masculine form for please,
Mm-hmm.
except when it came to one, instead of using the Arabic wahed,
Mm-hmm.
I became confused and used the Greek ana. In
Okay.
Arabic, ana means I am. So what
Mm-hmm.
I said was, I am a cup of coffee, please. Well,
Okay.
the people in the shop tried not to laugh because they were too polite, but when I realized what I said, I started laughing and the whole place broke up. And as a result was, I got a cup of coffee and a sweet on the house. And the next day I had an appointment with the minister. And he
Uh-huh.
said, "Oh, you're the American who speaks Arabic, aren't you?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, you've heard the story." He said, "My friend, the whole city's laughing about it."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm very embarrassed." He said, "Not at all. We like you for trying to speak our language. Most Westerners come here, they won't even learn how to say hello and goodbye."
Right.
So if you're forthright and can laugh at yourself, you get along pretty well overseas.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So, all right. So, right. So, I mean, all of this came into the novel. And as for the novel itself, not to give too much, to people. I
Okay,
mean, they're supposed to read it, right? But
I
essentially,
hope so.
what is this story all about? Because I
Well, the
mean,
story is all about
yeah.
a scientist who's disillusioned
Mm-hmm.
and is thinking of bailing out
Mm-hmm.
somehow. He's not sure how.
Mm-hmm.
He has a girlfriend, and they go on a trip to Greece
Mm-hmm.
at her insistence. He wanted to go to France. They go to Greece, and he is a Greek American, and he becomes so in tune with his heritage because he grew up speaking Greek at home,
Mm-hmm.
as I did. That was my first language,
Mm-hmm.
and the result is that he starts dreaming that he's talking to Pericles in his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And they have conversations about all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of people show an unnatural interest in him,
Mm-hmm.
some Germans,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and for example, and some others. And it turns out that he has some knowledge of where nuclear material can be obtained, and people are after that stuff. Those
Mm-hmm.
are the days when the Iraqis and others were very interested in developing their own weapons.
Right.
But
Right.
you have to have the nuclear material to do that, and that's not easy to get by a long shot.
Right.
So the plot takes off from there. He decides to do something to turn that into money
Mm-hmm.
that will enable him to bail out,
Mm-hmm.
and the story takes off from there.
Right.
And the
Right.
rest of it is all about what happened subsequently, the other people who became interested in him, how he managed to do this or that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fairly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me it's an interesting plot.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me it's an entertaining plot, and
Mm-hmm.
that's good enough for me. I'm not Shakespeare or Scott Fitzgerald.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot in the story. I mean, there's of course intrigue, and there's also
Yep,
the fantasy element. You know, like talking to Pericles, and
yep,
there's history in here. I mean, this takes place in the interesting time that you mentioned, right about the time
yes.
before the Soviet Empire. There's a lot in here. I mean, did you have any difficulty trying to put it all together, or did it just come, did it just
It,
flow?
it just flowed. I
Okay.
mean, in retrospect, I'm quite surprised at how easily it flowed. I mean, I would write and then I would ask my wife to read what I'd written, and she said, "Oh, it's fine." And then I'd go back and fix a little of this and fix a little of that.
Mm-hmm.
My sister is an English teacher, and she writes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And she warned me I'd have to have a plot outline or it would all go wrong. But it didn't. I mean, it just because it was something I knew.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something I had to invent out of whole cloth.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked. It worked well for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed writing it. And I feel better about some of the stuff that has bothered me all these years.
Right. Right.
It was, it was psychiatric in a sense, uh, if you know what I mean.
Right, right, sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, as you how that's the word cathartic, I believe would be the
Cathartic,
proper word. Yes,
cathartic,
yes,
an ancient Greek word meaning a cleansing.
right. And okay, so like it's I had to ask because I mean, like I'm thinking of some other authors who work with fiction. They can't really put in as many elements as I think has been put in here. I mean, suspense is part of intrigue, suspense part of mystery, stuff like that. But I don't think I recall any book that really does, that really balances this really well.
Well, I think humor was an important element in this book, and my partner read it, and he told me the humor was spot on, and that
Mm-hmm.
relieved me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one other part that I didn't really worry about that. I liked the humor that's in the book because it was
Mm-hmm.
genuine.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning of the book, where Pericles suddenly appears in his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was advised to introduce Pericles gradually, but I thought, let's just get him in there
Right.
and get started with the plot.
Right.
I have two grandchildren who are extremely bright, a boy and a girl, out on the
Mm-hmm.
West Coast, unfortunately,
Uh-huh.
for me. And I had them read it.
Uh-huh.
They were about 11 years old at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I asked them, I said, well, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And the girl said, it made me want to read more.
Okay.
And the boy said, I liked it. It's fun. So then I felt much better about that first part of the book. I
Right.
thought, well, people have to suspend their belief to read many books, and I said, yeah, they have to suspend it just a little bit and get past it. So that's the only real doubt I had about the book. But I had my young critics read it, and they liked it, so I felt good about that because children have a certain purity, if you will.
Yeah. True. All right. Cool. So, all right. So, the next question I'd like to ask is there another book along the way for Mr. Nicholas?
Well, there are two.
Okay. Great.
One is called How I Won the Cold War,
Okay.
and the other one is called I'm Not a Greek, I'm from Pittsburgh.
Uh-huh.
Now, that title emerged from my favorite watering hole in Heidelberg, Germany, a bar called the Kaminkklasse. We all knew it as Jack's Bar because Jack was the charismatic owner. And it was shortly after the Greek national soccer team had won the European Cup, and this German that I knew came up to me and he said, "You Greeks must be very happy." And I reflexively said, "I'm not a Greek, I'm from Pittsburgh."
Okay.
Now, every American in the place knew exactly what I was saying, but the Europeans were puzzled.
Uh-huh.
We most Americans have a dual I don't know what to call it, dual culture. We're all culturally split in a sense. We're all Americans, to be sure, but many of us have some ethnic origins in our background. My neighborhood was a blue-collar neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and we had Irish and Italians and Poles and Czechs and everything. And the elementary school I went to had black kids and Asian kids, and it was quite a mixing pot. In those days, the mixing pot neighborhoods were the blue-collar neighborhoods, and so the Americans in the place all knew what I said. So that book is about the most interesting jobs I've had in my career, and it starts out writing about the neighborhood I grew up in, the elementary school, the junior high school, the high school, the universities, and then I'll launch into the more interesting jobs. The other one, How I Won the Cold War, is related to my days on the Pershing missile system in Europe. That missile system was one of the keys to balancing the Soviets, and there was quite a game of almost cloak and dagger that went on there. I was actually approached by a spy. I turned that approach over to our security officer, and that was the end of it. But in the book, I think I'll develop that into a plot.
All right.
And my problem is I'm putting so much information about Pershing in the book that I'm going to have to cut that off and get on with the plot.
Right. Right.
That's what I mean. It didn't flow. It's not flowing as naturally.
Right. Okay. And I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of casual readers wouldn't be interested in knowing like the technical specifications of a Pershing missile or stuff like that.
No, but they would be interested in knowing that we had 600 nuclear missiles in Europe at the time.
Right.
We don't hear about that, or we hear about the ICBMs.
Right.
But those missiles alone could have devastated the Soviet Union.
Right.
And they had even more. In Western Europe. So again, this mutually assured destruction held. And in that book, I do explain what mutually assured destruction is and how it played into history.
Right. Okay, cool. So, all right, Nick, wish we could talk some more, but, in this last minute or so of this interview, is there anything you'd like to say, maybe to inspire listeners or maybe to have them think about something?
Well, I hope they'll buy my book. I wrote it to entertain and inform people. There's a large part of me in it, and I would like to see the book in the hands of people who enjoy reading books as I do. I enjoy reading books that are entertaining and informative at the same time.
Right.
And that was my objective. I hope people who buy my book, which is you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the sites. As we speak, a an audio version is being prepared. So that will be out probably in a couple of 3 months. It'll take a little while.
Right.
And so that's my wish. I hope they enjoy it. And if they do, I'll be very pleased, and we'll have achieved my objective besides relieving my own feelings.
All right. Okay, great. Well, great. Thank you very much for those words. All right,
Well,
then.
thank you, Alex.
You're welcome. And all right, then, in closing, our guest is Nick Nicholas. His book is Pericles and Me, a novel of international intrigue. You can find it on Amazon. So, Nick, again, thank you very much for being an author story. It's a lot of fun being able to speak with you.
Thank you.
So, everyone, check out Pericles and Me, and go right ahead and hit that subscribe button to check out all the people and stories that we'll cover in the future. So, catch you guys all next time on Author Story on our next episode. In this author story, the home of authors and people with stories that matter.